Everybody. So, full disclosure, all the talking and the smoke in the casinos, my throat, my voice is about gone, so if I sound particularly raspy, I apologize. Hope you're all having a great morning, lots of coffee, getting it going. So you're gonna find that on your D&O insurance, over the past 2 years, we've seen a downtrend in cost of approximately 47% on average. So that's been due to a myriad of factors, but we do believe that D&O has found its floor. And you're gonna find that we're starting to see things trending slowly back up a little bit. I'll let you know, I'm not sure that I'm gonna have time for any questions, but on the very last slide, there's a QR code for our management liability page on our website. My email's there. If there's anything that I can do to connect with you guys, work hard for you, what have you, just don't hesitate, let me know. Quick disclaimer, the views expressed here or the professional opinions of Churchwell Insurance Agency. It doesn't constitute legal, accounting, or ESG reporting advice. For counsel in these areas, consult a reputable firm. 156 bills have passed through legislation at the state and federal level just in 2023 on ESG. So we've got a lot to cover, dive into it. ESG trends impacting your D&O insurance. The purpose of my talk today is going to be threefold. Number one, I want to emphasize the risk that ESG is bringing to microcap companies. Number two, I want to show you how this risk is going to be translating to D&O insurance as we look forward. And number three is I want to give your companies some tools that you can use to reduce or transfer that risk. ESG initiatives at their core, it's kind of rooted in the idea that we can all be better, right? That's the hope of ESG, but good intentions don't mean that ESG is without its challenges. They've been politically polarizing, they've been subject to conflicting definitions, and the reality is that it's an additional layer of risk and responsibility that most people don't want but feel is thrust upon them. As a result of that, what we found is that in the world of microcaps, most leaders have proven to be lackadaisical at best or completely dismissive at worst whenever it comes to ESG. But here's the hard truth that I've got to share with you. That's coming to an end very quickly, and your D&O underwriters are going to make sure on that, because obviously D&O is a very big price tag for a lot of companies if you're carrying it, and you want to figure out ways that you can mitigate that risk. So why do D&O underwriters care about ESG? There's been a massive surge. Do you guys not have my PowerPoint? Oh, see, nobody told me that. Is this it? I love it. Look at that, I got all these pretty slides for you guys. All right, so you're gonna find that it's been a situation to where, number one, D&O underwriters care about a surge in ESG litigation, regulatory fines, EU reporting, NASDAQ requirements. SEC has been shiftier than a Barry Sanders highlight reel trying to get together on what they're going to do. Investor preferences have been polarized. Allegations of reverse discrimination, inaccurate carbon calculations, and unimplemented high-level policy decisions. We'll get into what that means later. But all of these things coming together have made it to where at the Professional Liability Underwriting Society, I'm a member of that, and at our most recent D&O symposium, they were polled, public underwriters were polled for D&O, and they said, what is the biggest concern that you guys have in pricing and risk looking forward? Overwhelmingly, the response was ESG. So you're gonna find that we'll dive into now starting to talk about what their largest concern is, and that's gonna be anti-ESG backlash litigation. So what starts with the big whales eventually will trickle down to the microcaps, because we're gonna see the court precedent set, and then it's things that later us smaller guys have to contend with. For example, Delta Airlines, carbon calculations, if you're familiar with that concept, it's something that it's going to ultimately receive some kickback once SEC pushes it out. We're confident that there'll be challenges in the courts, but we're already seeing ESG, anti-ESG being challenged in the courts through ways of Delta Airlines. They put out a claim of carbon neutrality as an airline, and they ended up with a class action lawsuit for questionable claims on that. You've got socially, Ben & Jerry's, you may or may not be aware that they recently took a socially sensitive position that they felt that the Israeli occupation in Palestine was illegal, and as a result, they decided they were going to quit selling Ben & Jerry's ice cream in Israel. As a result, their parent company ended up facing shareholder litigation. This one's an interesting one. Target, we're all familiar probably with the historical decline that they had in their stock price this past year. A lot of times people will say that's because of their position on gay pride and the boycotts that happened. Yeah, but why did they get sued? They actually got sued because of a governance issue. And that's why we have to make sure that we pay attention, because Target, for several years, made claims, guys, we know where our values are, we know where we stand on supporting LGBTQ, we're gonna continue to press that, we're gonna press it, but we have our pulse on the society. We're gonna not take it too far. You don't have to worry. Everything is okay. Shareholder call after shareholder call, they reassured their investors that there was nothing to worry about and that they wouldn't push it too far. Then they went one step further by doing some trans children wear and putting it in their stores, and the conservative mama bears went ballistic. And so boycotts happened, price tumbles. Investors said, you told us you weren't going to push it too far and you had your finger on the pulse. You had shareholder lawsuit over a governance issue. So moving past that, we're going to talk in real quick to ESG as it's defined generally and talk about what we're seeing with regulators coming up. So ESG, generally speaking, environmental, we can all agree. E, social, we can all agree. S, G, governance, we can all agree on that. Everything else, we're polarized in this room. We got about half of you that are gonna say that global warming's real and science supports it. Half of you are gonna say, yeah, man, it's colder than it's ever been, nice global warming, and you're gonna say science supports my side. So we don't even agree on the environmental. We're polarized on all of these different things, and there's not a unified definition beyond what those three words are. And what that's causing is conflicting views by regulators, conflicting views by corporations trying to put things together. And it's leading to misleading statements, false ESG reporting, something that's known as greenwashing that's going on. Greenwashing, I'm not gonna get into it, but if you wanted to, you could check out this article by Pamela Stiles. I highly recommend it. It's got great content in there on microcaps specifically as it's germane to this, but greenwashing essentially is being able to manipulate with the gray areas that we have, trying to manipulate the data in favor of you looking sexier as a green ESG qualified company. So you'll see EU reporting. EU, they've been the first one to roll it out to give us a target to hit. But here's the problem with it. EU realizes that ESG is fluid right now, so the target keeps moving. It's kind of like they're throwing stuff against the wall saying, let's see what sticks, and we'll move it around as we need to. Here's why that gets scary. In the same way that we all have CPAs, and we do so because tax law is changing all the time, and we don't want to spend our time keeping up with it, it puts us in a position to where we're gonna say, now, looking forward, we need an ESG firm that's in our team. And the reason why you need an ESG team, ESG firm, ESG person that's there, that knows it and is keeping current on everything, is because things are gonna be moving so fast and moving around, it's increasing your risk and the potential of regulators nailing you to the wall. So you're gonna find that there's some, You're gonna find that you've got Jeff Christensen from Daro IR. He was actually talking to me about some things not long ago, and he was like, hey, we're monitoring what's going on, and we know that it's gonna actually get really significant for microcaps over the next 2 years for us to have to worry about ESG. And when do you need to report? That's not on this, that slide's not on here, but I'll tell you what it is. So if you are in the EU domiciled, then you're gonna have to be reporting within 2 years. So you'll need to be getting dialed in on things over the next year so that you're really onboarded, up to speed, and great with your filings 2 years from now. If you're US or Africa or Asia, but you're doing business in the EU, you have 4 years. So you do have some time if you're not in the EU to really get cracking on things. If you're not an EU company, not doing business there, then your sites are likely faced on the SEC. So reporting was slated for early 23, then late 23, now Q1 24. When is it going to happen? We don't really know. But what we do know is this. They've already put together something called an ESG task force. We also know that the SEC in fiscal year 2022 handed out record fines. They are going to get their SEC regulation on ESG pushed through. You've got people such as Professor Damadorian, finance over at NYU. He wrote an article that's called "ESG is Beyond Redemption, May It Rip," and his whole premise was that ESG is dead. We just don't know it yet because capitalism is going to steer the dollar away from ESG initiatives, and where the dollar goes, everything else will follow. But there's one issue that he doesn't account for. I loved his article, but he doesn't account for the fact that we currently have an administration, love them, hate them, whatever. They have proven themselves to be very dedicated, despite the dollar costs associated with it, to their ESG agenda. And as a result of that, I'm supremely confident that they are going to push it through before this next election cycle, because that's something that they are committed to. Now, keeping that in frame, ESG task force in place, they're going to get the agenda pushed through. 2022, record year. We don't have final numbers on 23 yet, but we're expecting that they have their foot on the gas, and it's only going to get worse, and they're going to get more and more revenue. Now, keeping that in frame, flip over to NASDAQ, something that's more imminent. You may or may not be aware that with NASDAQ, there was a recent position that came through Fifth Circuit Court to where it was determined that NASDAQ could go ahead, they could stay on, and they could continue to have board requirements that are in place. These board requirements are significant because depending on the size of company you have, they're saying that you have to either have a certain number of female, minority, or LGBTQ plus members on your board. Just like it doesn't mean it doesn't matter if you have a full board. They're essentially saying that you have to say this is what we're going to have, and if you don't, then the problem is you have to disclose to them why. And if they don't love your answer, what they're going to do is they're going to have one of two things come at you. They are going to ultimately hit you with 180 days from the time that they come at you, or your next filing renewal, whichever one is longer. And if you don't have yourself in compliance by then they're going to send you a delisting letter. You can appeal to the NASDAQ board for panel review, but they're literally threatened to delist if you don't do this. This comes back to one of the issues and concerns that we have as we talk about regulators having conflicting requirements. Let's say that NASDAQ says you have to do this, but yet we have the state of Florida maybe who says, you know what? If you go and you start removing, if you're a Florida company and you start removing board of directors members based off of gender or ethnicity, then we'll end up throwing you out of being able to do business in our state. You never know. I mean, these are the kind of things that we're looking at to where regulators can be conflicting with each other in the current temperature that we have. And so you'll find that here's going to be the rules. The qualifiers are vague, but it's lovely if you are in a position to where your public float is under 250 million, or if you have annual revenue under 100 million with a public float under 700 million, you can satisfy the requirement by putting 2 females on your board, or 1 female and 1 self-identified underrepresented minority group or LGBTQ member. I actually reached out to NASDAQ and I said, hey, random question as I'm thinking about it. Do you consider Jewish people to be underrepresented? They haven't gotten back to me yet, so I'm not sure where that will fall in the spectrum of things, but you'll find that this is significant because there was a 3-judge panel that made this ruling, but they were all 3 Democrat-appointed judges, while the Fifth Circuit Court is predominantly a Republican-appointed court. So it's been appealed to the to the full court for review. It's still pending, we don't know, but there is potential for it to get turned over. But as it stands currently, this is a rule that's going into effect incredibly fast. So you've got to take that into consideration, and then we want to talk about ESG management tools. So Joe Holman, he's a ESG practice leader over at Witham. He actually wrote an incredible article. You got to figure out, where do I start? Where do I even start on this? There is an article you could Google, practical steps for developing an ESG strategy. Highly recommend it. Check that out. One of the things he mentions is internal controls are not defined or not confined for just accounting and financial reporting. ESG is becoming equally as important and requires an equally robust control structure to your finances. It's going to become that significant because of the fines that could be associated with it. And I will tell you that these things we're seeing is coming up just because of situations like you may have heard about UNC Chapel Hill and Harvard. They went to the Supreme Court last year. We've all heard of affirmative action. Supreme Court struck down affirmative action last year in college admission. How long is it going to be before that long-standing thing in the workforce ends up becoming something that has to go into contention and potentially be struck down? So we have diversity, equity, inclusion on one side, and then the Supreme Court saying, don't you dare, on the other side. We're conflicted, and we need to figure out a strategy of how you, as your leadership, are going to work on that, because we all know that when we fail to plan, we plan to fail. So let's go in, and we're going to look at this is my old PowerPoint. They didn't put the updated one in there. So, all right. So I'll tell you this. So number one, I'm going to talk to you about, you need to implement a strategy, and you need to do so by not talking publicly about what you're going to do until you do it. So Deutsche Bank said, we have created the ESG engine, and this is going to be incredible. We are going to be full tilt ESG, so supportive of it. Their IR team put it out, publicity all over the place, bragged about it internally in memos, but then they never implemented it. And it ended up costing them $25 million in fines. Make sure that before you brag, that you actually do. Otherwise, you're like a wannabe movie star in LA talking about what you're going to do instead of what you've actually done. So make sure that that's something you do. Additionally, good governance practices. Holman, whenever he actually talked on that last one about getting that in place, I need to add one component to that. Start talking to your D&O insurance about this. Make sure that they are aware of what you have going on, things that you're starting. If you've got an ESG firm that you've brought in, if you've got somebody that's going to be dedicated on your team for ESG, they need to know these things. That way, they can start trying to make sure that underwriters that are looking at this are actually crediting you on that. Additionally, you want to make sure that you go in and you talk about good governance practices and transparent reporting. Transparent reporting is going to be this idea of saying, we need to make sure our IR team is dialed in and on board with us. We need to make sure that our board of directors and C-level, they are all on the same board with us, on the same line with us, moving in the same vision, unified on ESG, because you're probably going to have some conflicting personal views amongst your board, but you need to make sure that you're unified as a front whenever you speak out publicly. And then discuss the idea of green hushing. Green hushing is basically what Iger has started to do over at Disney once he took over. He realized us being so bold in our don't say gay policy and all of these other positions that they took, it backfired on them in a lot of ways. Boycotting, share price, lots of stuff. And they realized we need to take a more muted approach. It's called green hushing. In fact, the Wall Street Journal put out an article on it called, it was Companies Scale Back Communication and Diversity and Sustainability Amidst Culture War Backlash. It was this summer. And it's basically a way of your leadership to combat the anti-ESG backlash by going ahead, pursuing the initiatives, whatever you want, but just being more muted and not so aggressive and assertive in how you accomplish that. Then, additionally, you want to look at reviewing your insurance with an executive liability provider. Whether you use Churchwell Insurance Agency, I'm not the only guy in town. There's lots of great people that you can work with. but make sure you're not getting your D&O insurance from the same guy that writes your home and car. Like, it's a bad call. It's a bad call. You need people that are literally living in this ecosystem to work hard for you and do things the right way. We're in a really shifty sand environment right now, and where we're headed as a country from ESG perspectives, and just a lot of litigation that is heating up in some very new trending ways. With that in frame, I just want to thank you all for your attention. I don't know that I have any time for questions, but no, I don't. I do. Anybody have a question? Not that you would, because it's insurance, right? Who gets excited about it? Oh, we got one guy that's excited about insurance. Hey, I know my place in the food chain. None of you get excited until you find out you're getting sued.
I'm excited about the law. How, if you know the cases with Delta and Ben and Jerry work out to those lawsuits?
They're still pending.
They are pending.
Yeah, those are pending right now still.
Thank you.
But great question. So, as we all know, cases like that can sometimes take years, right, to litigate or to ultimately arrive at a settlement. But it's on some of these positions, on these larger guys with bigger war chests that have significant stake in ESG. It's a trench warfare for them. So some of these guys are really trying to push, and they want to see where this plays out as opposed to having a settlement situation. They want precedent. Great question. Anybody else? It's just you and me, brother. It's just you and me. So with that in frame again, I'm Chaz with Churchwell Insurance Agency. If there's anything we can do to work hard protecting what your teams are working hard to build, we'd be thrilled for the opportunity. I got a booth over there. It's bright blue and orange. Can't miss it. Thank you.